He said, "All right, tell me again." Dad, listen, I tried as hard as I could. And for what? Where am I headed? I'm telling you it's no use and that's all there is to it. I don't want to hear that whining. I thought I raised a man, not a coward. It was as though he leveled a double-barreled shotgun at my head. Dad, please. Sure, I'll please you. I'm going to pack your stuff. That's what I'm going to do. You can go back and work in the mines like me. The sight of him, his face as white as a sheet, his eyes full of sorrow and shame as he flung socks and shirts into my bag, all the time muttering, "I thought I raised a man." I groped for something to say that would stop him. It happened slowly, welling up from deep inside. Those lost memories of us at the Baxter Springs ballpark, with him pushing his way through the crowds, grinning, looking everywhere and bragging to everybody about his kid. And days when he just sat slumped, the mines robbing him of his strength. Dog weary, probably thinking about all the dreams that had turned sour in his own life. What life had to be for him now. And I realized it was the thought of me making good that kept him going. Something he could cling to no matter what. Okay, I understand. Give me another chance. I'll try, honest I will. He hesitated, a hint of a smile, and he slapped the bag with his hand. What the hell, why not, huh? A few minutes later, downstairs in the coffee shop, he simply said, "So you've had your slump. You're not the first, and you sure won't be the last. Everybody has them, even DiMaggio. Take my word, it'll come together, you'll see." That's how it ended. We ate, he patted my back, I took a quick sip of coffee, then watched him walk up the street toward his car. I stood there looking, and all I saw was the strong, youthful father I'd always known. That was a passage from a book called The Mick, written by Mickey Mantle, published in 1985. Along with the help of writer Herb Gluck, The Mick is a story straight from the mouth of Mickey Mantle. His childhood, his rise to greatness, and all the struggles, challenges, and setbacks along the way. The opening passage that I just read was a pivotal time in Mickey's life, when his confidence was at an all-time low. It's the moment, the exact moment when his career would be saved by a timely meeting with his father. A young 19-year-old Mickey Mantle was ready to quit baseball for good and return home to Oklahoma. But before giving up, he called his dad and told him his plans to quit. Mickey's dad jumped in his car and drove 5 hours to Kansas City, where Mickey was playing in the AAA minor leagues. The emotional confrontation saved a Hall of Fame baseball career that hadn't even started yet. If Mickey's dad wasn't able to steer the conversation in the right direction, it's possible the Mick would have never existed as we know it. 1951 was a year that Mickey Mantle would have never predicted. It's just one chapter in the book I just read, but of all the amazing accomplishments in the career of Mickey Mantle, the events of 1951 stood out like nothing else. The events during just this 1 year set the stage for Mickey Mantle to become the Mick, the legendary ball player that defined an entire era and created a cultural icon. So we need to back up a few months from the confrontation between Mickey and his dad that we just read. Just a few months before that fateful discussion in the hotel room in Kansas City, Mickey Mantle was in Arizona for spring training with the New York Yankees, and he's trying to make the team. It was April 1951, and just as spring training ended, Mickey found out he made the big league squad, the big show. As he's wrapping up spring training in Arizona with the Yankees, he didn't have a contract to play Major League Baseball yet, but he's off to the major leagues. He was able to sign one contract before he left Arizona. On April 13th, Mickey Mantle signed a $100 contract to appear on Bowman baseball cards. 1951 was the year that the Bowman Gum Company printed one of the most valuable baseball cards of all time, the Mickey Mantle rookie card. So now Mickey has $100 in his pocket from the Bowman Gum Company and not much else. So he hops on the train headed for opening day as the newest member of the New York Yankees. And it would be just 2 days later where Mickey Mantle decides to begin his amazing book, The Mick, with this opening passage. He says, quote, "Let's start here. April 15, 1951, my first season as a Yankee. I'm on a train headed for Washington, opening day against the Senators. And I'm saying to myself, what am I doing anyway? I don't even have a contract. What's going to happen now? Where do I fit in? I know I can play minor league ball, yet all the talk, another Babe Ruth, another Joe DiMaggio. Who's kidding who?" So this is the start of his book, The Mick, and now he's on a train with the team headed to Washington for opening day. But he doesn't have a contract, and he's not sure where or if he'll fit in with the big league Yankee team. He describes a meeting on the train as the Yankees head across the country from spring training to the opening day game in Washington, D.C. This is from the Mick's book. He says, "A sudden wash of rain across the window pinpoint lights of Washington getting nearer and nearer. Casey Stengel is at my shoulder saying, "Come on, I want you to meet Del Webb, Dan Topping, and George Weiss. They're waiting for us in the smoking lounge." I'm just the new kid, and the top guys, the two owners and general manager of the team, want to talk to me. I say, "All right," hesitating to add, "Casey, can you tell me something? Am I going to play in Beaumont this year?" So this is Mickey asking his manager, Casey Stengel, if he's going to play in Beaumont, which is one of the Yankees' minor league teams. He's trying to figure out where he's going to fit into this whole thing because nobody's told him anything yet. And his manager, Casey Stengel, responds. He winks. "I think you'll stay with us." Then he says, "When we get back there, just be quiet and I'll do the talking." We move from car to car toward the lounge. Then my first glimpse of the big brass. And Casey says, "You all know Mickey?" Webb and Topping beam flashy smiles, congratulating me for the fine job I've done in spring training. Whereupon Casey tells Weiss, "I'm ready for the Yankees." Weiss mutters, "I think he's too young." "I don't care if he's in diapers," says Casey. "If he's good enough to play for us on the regular basis, I want to keep him." Now it's Webb's turn. He tells Weiss soothingly, "George, they've been writing so much stuff about Mickey, I feel we have to keep him." Topping agrees. "The thing is, George, we're not opening in New York. We're opening in Washington. After 2 or 3 games under his belt, I think he'll be all right." So Casey Stengel, the manager of the Yankees, is introducing Mickey to the team owners, and they're debating on what to do with the rookie and how much to pay him. As Mickey's standing right there in front of them, they start to talk about a contract, and team general manager George Weiss recommends starting Mickey at $2,500 above the league minimum of $5,000. During the discussion, Mickey's standing there and thinking about when he made $200 a month playing in the minor leagues. So $7,500 sounds like a fortune to him. But the team owners go back and forth, and this is probably an act they've done a million times with every player on the team, just sort of batting them around a little, trying to bring down the players' salary expectations. But they debate how Mickey needs more experience and if he'll even make the lineup with all the veteran stars already on the Yankee team. Finally, George Weiss lets out a sigh and agrees to a $7,500 contract for Mickey, and if he doesn't perform, they'll just send him down to the minor leagues. But Mickey is standing right there listening and biting his tongue, trying not to agree to anything they throw out there. Probably why Casey Stengel warned him not to say anything before the meeting, because Mickey would probably sign up just about any deal they put in front of him at this point, just to have something in writing. But after the meeting, Mickey describes it like this in his book. He says he floats out of that smoking lounge like I'm in a dream. He says, "I just signed my first major league contract, easily the biggest moment in my 19 years. And this is from Mickey's book. After now he has his first big contract, riding on the train, heading to the first game of his 1951 rookie season with the Yankees. Back in my seat, I look out into the rain and I'm far away, back home at the real beginning of it all. I remember my dad walking down the street in Commerce, Oklahoma. He's coming home from work in the lead mines, smiling wearily. I peer into his lunch bucket for a piece of cupcake that he always saves for me. And I've brought along my glove and a tennis ball for the game that we play every evening until dark. Out loud, I hear myself say, everything will be better now. It sure will be. I wish there was a way to let my dad know right away, but I can only hope he'll read about my signing in the papers tomorrow." So the book goes through Mickey's childhood in Commerce, Oklahoma. And he describes this part of Oklahoma as almost a gold rush back in the day, only it wasn't from gold. It was from zinc and lead mines that made it a boomtown while companies rushed in to extract the valuable resources. Workers flocked to the area for mining jobs. Mickey's dad would be one of those miners. And with his son, Mickey, born in 1931 during the Great Depression, Mickey's father, Mutt, was what his nickname was, so they called him Mutt, worked in the mines to support his family. And Mickey describes the tough conditions of working in the mines. As you can imagine, it was hard times, but there was always baseball in Mickey's family. Mickey's father, Mutt, played amateur baseball on the weekends, and that was a big part of Mickey's life growing up. So he describes how important it was in his book. Baseball was so important to Mutt, Mickey's dad, that he already knew what he would name his son. So he says this in his book. He says, "Before I was even born, he had a name picked out. Mickey, after Mickey Cotrain, the great hitting catcher who spent his entire career in the American League. Yet Dad was a lifetime St. Louis Cardinals fan. He practically lived and died with them while I was growing up. So the best I can figure is that he must have singled out Cotrain because of his qualities. Brash, fiercely competitive, a sure winner. Guess Dad thought that someday I'd step into Cotrain's shoes." Mickey and his dad played ball every single day in the backyard, and that's where his dad and his grandpa taught him to become a switch hitter. Somehow they knew that switch hitting would be important, because Mickey talks about how not many players could switch hit. Then it became real popular once he got into the big leagues after he'd been doing it since he was a kid. So it was a big baseball family in Mickey's house from day one. This is from his book. He says, "Every Christmas he bought me a glove, a good one, getting larger ones for me each year as I grew. We had no money to speak of, and the gloves were expensive. I used a Bill Joke model. Spittin' Bill, who was a Cardinals pitcher then. Anyway, all through my early childhood, Dad kept drumming it in. Practice, practice, practice." Which I did, attacking each pitch, whether it was thrown underhand, sideways, or over the top. So you can see now, if you didn't know this already, that Mickey Mantle didn't just decide to give baseball a try when he was a teenager and then find out he was great at it. He was working and practicing the game basically since the day he was born. His dad was there all the way along, preaching the game and making sure he was working hard to improve. And here's how Mickey describes it in his book a little bit more. "Dad worked with me every day, and the practice paid off. By the time I reached second grade, I was hitting them pretty good from the right side, but Dad also wanted me to bat lefty, which I hated. When it got dark and supper was ready, Dad would turn me around from the righty to lefty. 'Your belly can wait,' he'd say. Then he'd start pitching again. He believed that any kid could develop into a switch hitter if you taught him early enough. More to the point, he had this uncanny instinct and actually predicted that someday in the not too distant future, we'd find just about every big league manager platooning his players, right-handed batters facing southpaws and vice versa, depending upon the situation. The year I joined the Yankees is when Casey Stengel started to platoon. So Dad was a prophet in his own way long before the system became an accepted part of the game." So here's what I was saying about Mickey becoming a switch hitter way before it was a popular thing to do. And you can see his dad's influence all through the early days of his life, making sure that Mickey was always practicing. And this is from his book. Again, he says this, "But as a boy, who could see that far? In fact, it's a wonder I didn't rebel against baseball from having it spoon-fed down my throat every day of my life. But somehow Dad always made it seem like fun." And this is a key. Mickey says it's a wonder he didn't rebel against baseball, but his dad always made it seem like fun. After reading a whole bunch of books on Mickey Mantle over the last week or so, that statement really stuck out to me. There was a special relationship between Mickey and his dad. It was a tough one, but there was a connection, and his dad was wise enough to keep that connection going through his entire life. So Mickey talks a lot about his childhood in his book and growing up in Commerce, Oklahoma, how he could hike for miles to play ball, and then on the weekend games against other towns that attracted huge crowds. And the atmosphere at some of these games, which was mostly the miners and their families just relaxing on the weekend and watching baseball. Mickey adds that even though there wasn't much money growing up, his dad always found a way to bring him to a Class C baseball game in Springfield, Missouri. And that's where he saw a young Stan Musial. He said he saw him hitting bullets in batting practice. His dad pointed him out and said, "See that guy? He's going to be a major league star." He pointed to Stan Musial, soon to be my first baseball idol. And that was out of Mickey's book. So things were tough growing up. And the book goes all into details about all of Mickey's early childhood. There was a time when Mutt, Mickey's dad, found a new job working as a farmer. And it was a big change for the family, but Mutt wanted to get out of the mines. Then just as harvest was ready, a flood hit the farm and wiped out all the crops and flooded the house. So Mickey talks about how that was a devastating blow for his dad because he realized he'd have to go back to work in the mines again. And Mickey remembers seeing his dad just staring off into the distance with his jaws clenched. So really, really tough times. And it wasn't lost on Mickey, who remembers all these stories. And he talks about his mom and his dad both just doing whatever they could to make it work. Mickey talks about his friend convincing him to try out for the high school football team and how his dad tried to talk him out of it because he knew he might get injured and it would hurt his baseball season. But of course, Mickey played football with his friends and he ended up suffering an injury during a game when he was running the ball. He was kicked in the shin by an opposing player. And so the day after the injury, Mickey's shin had swollen severely and his dad had to drive him to the hospital. So Mickey laid in the hospital for weeks. His leg was still swollen and he had a fever that wouldn't quit. And it got so bad that a doctor recommended amputating Mickey's leg at one point. And so Mickey's mom figured out a way to transfer her son to the Crippled Children's Hospital in Oklahoma City. So Mickey's thinking he'll never play baseball again, but it happens to be the same year that penicillin came out. And they ended up giving him a bunch of penicillin shots at the new hospital in Oklahoma City. And then the swelling began to finally go down. And so after just a few days, Mickey was out of the hospital. Eventually, Mickey recovered and was back to playing baseball. His determination to be the best was growing, and he mentions it in his book. At this point, he says, "I had no other enjoyment. Nothing was more important." So now, of course, he's getting better and better, and he's improving as a teenager, and he's getting bigger and stronger. And he was asked to join a team in Baxter Springs, a nearby town where hundreds of fans attended the games. He started to make a name for himself there in Baxter Springs. In the book, Mickey talks about the game when he hit 3 home runs that went into the river beyond the outfield wall. 2 home runs right-handed and 1 left-handed. So he was drawing a crowd and making a big impression at the field in Baxter Springs. And now by 1948, when Mickey was 17, he had a stroke of luck when a scout for the Yankees was in town to look at a player named Billy Johnson. Mickey had a big game, hitting a few home runs into the river on 1 bounce, while Tom Greenwade, the scout for the Yankees, was in the stands watching. So during this game, a rainstorm hits and everyone runs for cover. And Mickey runs into his dad's car to get out of the rain, and his dad says, "Hey, there's somebody sitting inside the car that wants to talk to you." And it was Tom Greenwade, the Yankee scout. And he offers Mickey a deal right there in the car. And this is from Mickey's book. "I also remember the rain, a big cloudburst, everybody ducking for their cars, when suddenly Dad steers me to his, saying there's a fellow in there who's dying to meet me. It's Greenwade. A reedy old guy with a nice friendly smile. He says, 'How would you like to play for the Yankees?' I give him a look, totally flabbergasted. He says, 'Well, I can't talk officially because you're still in high school, but don't sign with anyone else, and the day you graduate, I'll be back.' Dad says, 'With an offer?' And Greenwade smiles reassuringly, 'We'll see what we can do.' Going home, I remember Dad explaining the opportunities I'd have in New York. Feeling the excitement as he talked about Yankee Stadium, the Babe, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, a royal tradition. 'No question,' he said, 'we ought to wait on Greenwade.' Now Mickey's only 17 and he needs to finish high school, but as the months pass by, he talks about how Greenwade's deal starts to fade a little bit. What if he never comes back to make that deal that he promised? But springtime comes and then high school graduation, and sure enough, Tom Greenwade is right there, just like he said. And here's how Mickey explains it. And it's a good reminder that sometimes nothing is easy. It's just one battle after the other. Because Greenwade knows he wants to sign Mickey, but he also wants to make a good deal for the Yankees. And Greenwade does this sort of thing for a living. And Mickey and his dad don't have much experience negotiating against Major League Baseball teams. So here's how Mickey explains it in his book. Yet Greenwade comes over to Dad after the game and says very solemnly, "I'm afraid Mickey may never reach the Yankees. Right now, I'd have to rate him a lousy shortstop, sloppy, erratic arm, and he's small. Get him in front of some really strong pitching." Then without blinking an eye, he says, "However, I'm willing to take a risk." And here's where the professional baseball scout up against Mickey and his dad in a negotiation, it's just not a fair fight. So Mickey says, he stuck a contract in Dad's hand. "All right, Mutt, I'm ready to give Mickey $400 for playing at Independence the rest of the summer." Dad winced. He can make that much playing Sunday ball and working in the mines during the week. Greenwade started scribbling something on the back of an envelope. Finally, he says, "Tell you what, we'll throw in an $1,100 bonus. How does that sound?" The old ballyhoo, a foxy move to get around the possibility of having to offer a heck of a lot more. When I read the announcement about my signing, it quoted Greenwade as saying I would probably set records with the Yankees, stuff like that. He did tell me later that I was the best prospect he'd ever seen. So Mickey signs the deal with Tom Greenwade for a $1,100 signing bonus. And other players of this caliber at the time, other prospects are signing bonuses of $20,000 to $25,000. To give you an idea of the deal that Tom Greenwade struck for Mickey Mantle, one of the biggest prospects of this year at this time. There's another player that signed a $25,000 to $30,000 signing bonus at this exact time. Mickey didn't know it, of course, at the time, but Greenwade made a great deal, needless to say. So Mickey's assigned to the minor league Class D Yankees team in Independence, Kansas. Mickey tells a few other good stories about working his way up through the minor league ranks. He says one guy on his team, they called him the old man, and the guy was 21 years old. But the competition is getting tougher, and Mickey talks a lot about this in his book, how frustrating it was for not being as successful as he had been in the past. And then as usual, and this is something that he does through the entire book, but Mickey is surprisingly transparent about so many of the mistakes that he made. I was surprised by this, but this is why the guy is so loved by everyone. He just has this great down-to-earth personality, and it comes through in this book. Anyways, he talks about how wild his throws were at shortstop and how they had to put up chicken wire behind first base as protection so people in the stands don't get killed by his errant throws. So Mickey ends the season and heads home to Commerce, Oklahoma. He goes back to work in the mines over the winter and he tries to stay in shape. And now it's the start of the 1950 season and Mickey's back in the Yankees minor league system. But people are starting to notice the distance he's getting on his home runs. Mickey was still growing bigger and stronger. Here's how he describes it in his book. As we traveled around the Western Association, the fans yelled for more. Once in a while I'd come through and the papers would say it was a first, the only home run hit that far in St. Joe or Topeka, wherever. Besides, I was hitting close to the 400 mark most of the season. That's when they started to call me the Commerce Comet, and the word spread. The Yankees brass took notice, giving me their highest ratings for speed, throwing, and power. But it all came up to them through Harry Kraft, who was still saying, put him in the outfield. So Mickey's tearing it up through the 1950 season. And finally his manager pulls him aside one day and he says it like this. We were coming home from our last road trip late at night. Harry Kraft always sat alone, down front, keeping the adjoining seat empty. When I got on the bus, he called me over. Mick, he began in a level voice, I wasn't going to tell you until later, but this is as good a time as any. The Yankees are bringing you up the day our season ends. You'll meet the team in St. Louis, then travel with them on their last 2-week swing. So Mickey goes back to his seat and says, this is what he says in the book. He says, I could hardly refrain from shouting, hot dog, I'm going to be a Yankee. So Mickey talks about his first experience as a major leaguer for the Yankees. It was Sunday, September 17, 1950, and I was at Sportsman's Park, moments before the Yankees-St. Louis Browns doubleheader. I can't imagine anyone being more scared. There was a big crowd and the noise kept building while the Yankees took infield practice. He's explaining his first big league game here. He says, the rest is a maze. Working out for a while, watching Johnny Hop's grand slam homer beat St. Louis, hearing him being interviewed after the second game, everybody talking about the stretch, drive, and another Yankee pennant. Somehow I got through it all. And then Mickey talks a little bit about his first few games with Joe DiMaggio, who was just a living legend at this time. It was his last year, second to last year. So he talks about DiMaggio a little bit. He says, with Joe DiMaggio, I couldn't even mumble hello. He had this aura. It was as if you needed an appointment just to approach him. Then it was a question of getting up enough courage to speak. Remember, I had been reading about this guy for a long time. So I'd look at him and keep looking, and I'd imagine he got tired of having my face always turned toward him whenever we were within 10 feet of each other. The truth is, I'd be thinking, man, I wish I could play like him, but it's going to be hard. After the season, Mickey returns home to Commerce, and now that he played in the big leagues, even just for a few games at the end of the 1950 season, his dad is as proud as ever, and he's telling all the neighbors about his son and how he wears the same uniform as DiMaggio. And he's bragging that Joe knows him personally, is what he said in the book. So Dad's proud, and here's Mickey explaining it. He says, he was prouder than I'd ever seen him. He knew I would make the team the next year. I saw it in his eyes. The way he'd strut down the street, as though the buttons would pop right off his shirt. But Mickey had to work over the winter. He's got to make money. So he's back at the mines again. He's making money and waiting for spring training to start the next year. And then he talks about how his dad is having health issues. He's starting to notice, and Mickey could tell something seriously could be wrong. So now Mickey gets engaged to his high school sweetheart, Marilyn, that winter before the 1951 season. And then he gets a letter, January 1951, from the Yankees, and it's telling him to report to spring training in Phoenix in the middle of February. But Mickey waits for a ticket for transportation because he doesn't have any money. And he's thinking the Yankees are going to send him a ticket to get to spring training. But the ticket never arrives, so Mickey never goes to spring training. And finally, a sports writer shows up at Mickey's house and he asks him why he's not at spring training. And Mickey tells him it's because he doesn't have a ticket. So the sports writer quotes Mickey, and the Yankees read why their new star isn't at spring training. And so they send the scout, Tom Greenwade, the next morning to Mickey's house. And Greenwade delivers a train ticket to Mickey so he can get to spring training in Arizona. And so Mickey talks about his spring training in 1951, and he's trying to make the team. He says that other rookies were leaving in bunches, but at the end it was just him and 2 other rookies that made the big league roster. But now he adds that he didn't expect to stay up on the big league squad because he didn't have a contract. And now we get back to our earlier story about Mickey on the train heading for opening day, with rain pouring down and then meeting the Yankee owners along with Casey Stengel and striking up a deal for the very first big league contract at $7,500 per month. And as it turns out, the rain would continue for days. So they had to cancel the opening games with Washington, and they headed straight up to New York to open the season against the Boston Red Sox at Yankee Stadium. Mickey shows up at Yankee Stadium for the season opener against the Red Sox. He looks at the lineup card and sees his name. He's hitting third, right before DiMaggio. So here's how he describes what happens next in his book. We come trotting up the dugout steps, and in front of us is the biggest crowd I've ever seen in my life. About 50,000, 20 times the population of Commerce. It seems the whole world was there. I stood frozen. Nothing moved. I took off for right field as if my ass had caught fire and didn't stop grinning until they were finished playing the national anthem. When the last note died, it was Panicsville again. I was about to play my first major league game, and the only thing that registered was the awesome roar of the crowd, plus a realization that I was sharing the same field with Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams. Ted was in a class by himself, the splendid Splinter. And then, so in the same game, Mickey gets his first big league hit, and here's what he says. My first official hit came in the 6th inning off Bill Wright, a tricky left-hander. A line drive single between short and third to score Jackie Jensen. I couldn't stop thinking of myself roaming that same ground where Babe Ruth once played and looking at his monument behind the center field fence. The sweep of the stands, the facade, the whole place sparkling. I'll never forget it. Now, Mickey talks about the expectations from the New York fans, and the pressure is starting to set in pretty quick. He says the New York fans were led to believe some kind of Superman had arrived on the scene. He was going to hit ball after ball over the center field bleachers, clear into the Harlem River. He was another Ruth, another DiMaggio, maybe better than both. But I was neither. I had enough trouble trying to be Mickey Mantle. In those beginning weeks, I hit the ball pretty good from the right side. Fastballs coming in high and tight to the left side had me flailing away at empty air. Funny, I'd hit them regularly during batting practice, but during the game, the cagey pitcher would take advantage of my glaring weakness. High and tight, up and in, you're out. So here's Mickey. He's remembering all the frustration, and his self-confidence begins to plummet. The New York sports writers and the fans, it felt like everyone was against him. And it's going to spiral pretty quick. Here's what he says. It was a case of too much too soon. Too many people expecting more than I could deliver. And the New York crowd can be very cruel if they think you've let them down. I'd hear their shouts coming from the right field stands. Guys screaming at the top of their lungs. Boos and catcalls. Curses. Go back to Oklahoma, you big bum. Oh yeah, it was intimidating. I actually dreaded the idea of going to the ballpark, knowing a bunch of fans were already waiting at the players' entrance, anxious to get their licks in. Here it was the end of April, and they still hadn't seen a home run off my bat. So how could I blame them for being mad? So Mickey finally gets his first big league home run, but he's really struggling, and his book talks in detail about the downhill slide, and he's saying he's just waiting to be sent down to the minor leagues. Big league pitchers now know to just keep throwing the chest-high fastball on the inside of the plate, and Mickey's in big trouble. He can't hit it. There's one story where there's 2 outs in the 9th inning, and Mickey has 2 strikes on him, and he lays down a bunt because he's in such a bad slump. But the bunt goes foul. And of course, that's the third out and the end of the game. And everybody just walks off the field. And he says his manager, Casey Stengel, has every reason to send him down to the minors right there. And of course, the reporters are all over Mickey after every game. They're gathering around him. They're just flocking his locker and knowing that he's starting to crash and burn. And they're peppering him with questions. And it's driving Mickey crazy. And he really is showing his frustration. And so he talks about swinging at pitches in the dirt, and then he's smashing his bats, and he's kicking over chairs, and he's pounding the dugout with his fists. It's just not a good scene as the way he describes it. If it didn't already sound bad enough, he ends up dropping a fly ball that was hit right at him in a very close ball game, and his own pitcher confronts him. Finally, soon after that, a doubleheader against the Red Sox. Mickey struck out 3 times in the first game, then 2 more times to start the second game. So 5 strikeouts in a row. Casey pulls him out of the lineup, and at that point, Mickey pretty much knows he's going down to the minor leagues. So he goes down. He's sent off to the AAA minor league team, and Mickey's crushed. They gave him a one-way plane ticket to Minneapolis so he can catch up with the minor league team there. And the first few games in the minors, they don't go any differently for Mickey. He was totally out of it. No hits in his first 15 at-bats in the minor leagues. And so Mickey is really, really down at this point. So he was supposed to be the next big thing and couldn't even deliver in the minor leagues. And now the fans, the writers, his teammates, everyone was on him. He talks about getting bags of letters, and it was a lot of hate mail that he was getting from people calling him a bum, and he was just feeling it from every direction. And his attitude was also really, really bad at this time. People were asking him for his autograph on the street, and Mickey's telling him just to get lost. So he's about as low as you can get at this point. It's just a really, really low point as you're reading this book. And finally, luckily, he decides to call his dad, who's working at the mines. He calls the mines and asks for his dad. And here's how he describes the phone call. And this is the phone call that would change everything. He says from his book, "A few days passed. I finally called the Eagle pitcher mines, asking for Dad. He came to the phone with a tired sounding hello. It's me. I'm in Kansas City. Yeah, I've been reading. Yeah, well, it looks like I can't play here either. What? I'm not hitting, Dad. I just can't play anymore. I can't. Hell, you can't. Where are you staying?" The way he said it, I knew his body had tensed up and I could feel his disappointment. "I'm at the Aladdin Hotel." "Okay, I'll be there." "When?" He hung up. I paced the floor, waiting, rehearsing what I would tell him. After what seemed like years, he was at the door, haggard after a 5-hour drive from Commerce, but his eyes were blazing. The same look he used to give me when I was a little boy and did something to displease him. He didn't need a whip, only that stare. So here's where we started the episode, the confrontation that would change everything for Mickey. Mickey calls his dad and tells him he's quitting baseball. His dad immediately drives 5 hours to Kansas City and confronts his son. He tells Mickey he can go to work in the mines. And he actually starts to help him pack his bags right there on the spot. This is the fateful conversation that saved Mickey Mantle's career. And luckily, Mickey decides to give it one more shot after hearing his dad. And that's why I wanted to start the episode with this discussion. It's the moment that everything changed. A great father-son moment, snapping Mickey back to life. And now we all know what happens next. And it was almost immediate. But the next few games, he was completely driven and focused, and he started hitting again, the way that he and his dad both knew he could. And here's how he describes it. "The next day I went back to playing ball, really bearing down, telling myself over and over, I'm going to do it for him. We played our next series in Toledo. I hit a double, a triple, and 2 homers over the light tower. My last time up, they told me I needed a single to go for the cycle, so I bunted. By then we were way ahead, and as I went into the dugout, George Selkirk looked at me and winked as if to say, I'm not going to get on you this time. During the next 40 games, I went berserk. 11 home runs, 50 RBIs, and a .361 batting average. We did it, me and my dad. I was on my way back. The Yankees brought me up from Kansas City around the end of August. So Mickey's back in the big leagues with the Yankees, and it's the end of the 1951 season. And Mickey gets the news that he'll be the starting right fielder in the first game of the World Series. And of course, his dad heads to the game, driving to Yankee Stadium from the mines of Oklahoma to watch his kid play in the 1951 World Series. And here's how he says it in his book. He says, "Certainly my father felt tremendously happy about my success, something he had dreamed about from the moment I was born. Little Mickey, his son, his best hope in a world that had all but beaten him down. I played the first game of the 1951 World Series feeling like I didn't belong. Dave Koslow held me to 2 walks and the Giants beat us 5-1. I was afraid to look at the lineup card for the next game, but finally gave it a passing glance. Right field, Mantle, leading off again." And that's what you call a comeback right there, from nearly missing spring training earlier that year because he didn't get a train ticket to Arizona, then making the Major League Yankees team, signing his first contract on the train ride to opening day, having some success, but then getting pummeled by everybody after not performing and getting sent down to the minor leagues, going 0 for his first 15 in AAA minor league ball, calling his dad to come and pick him up because he's done, telling his dad he can't hit the ball anymore, and the fateful conversation after his dad drives 5 hours to talk some sense into his son. He makes it back to the big leagues and finds himself hitting leadoff in the World Series in the same year. That's quite a rookie year for Mickey Mantle, 1951. But it's not even close to being over yet. Mickey suffers a leg injury in Game 2 of the 1951 World Series. He's chasing a fly ball in the outfield, a ball hit by another rookie named Willie Mays. So Willie Mays hits a fly ball and Mickey Mantle chases it down, only to be called off at the last second by none other than Joe DiMaggio. Just as Mickey pulls up to avoid colliding with DiMaggio, his spikes get caught and he blows out his knee. Mickey drops to the ground, and some people said they thought he was shot. He just laid there motionless for a few seconds, but it appeared he was shot or had a heart attack for a few long seconds. But it was his knee that blew out. So the season's over for Mickey. They have to stretcher him off the field. His dad finds his way down to the dugout, and Mickey says later on he has no idea how his dad got into the dugout during a World Series game, but there he is. Mutt is in the dugout, meeting his son as he gets carted off the field. So his dad rides to the hospital with Mickey, and they pull up to the hospital, get out of the car, and Mickey's dad collapses onto the ground. So now both father and son are in the hospital in beds in the same room, and they're watching the World Series on TV. They later find out that Mickey's dad has Hodgkin's disease. At the end of 1951, Mickey and his dad are in hospital, sharing a room together. Mickey has torn ligaments in his knee. His dad finds out he has Hodgkin's. Mickey's dad, Mutt is what they called him, he passed away about 8 months later. In May of 1952, he was 40 years old when he died. And that's where we have to end it. The story of Mickey Mantle continues on. I found the book fascinating because it was from Mickey himself. With the help of writer Herb Gluck, I was glued to the pages. Actually, I read the book twice. It was such a smooth read, if that makes any sense. The book was written to flow just like Mickey was sitting there telling the story. So I was really impressed with how easy it was to read this book, and I really enjoyed it. I do have a few other books on Mickey Mantle that are much longer and more detailed. One's titled The Last Boy by Jane Levy. Another book I thought was really good was called Mantle, The Best There Ever Was, written by Tony Castro. But the father and son relationship might be the biggest takeaway for me when reading about Mickey Mantle, and how this one crucial meeting at the hotel in Kansas City when Mickey Mantle was about to give up and his dad knew there was no way he was going to watch his kid give up without a fight, and he put up a fight and ended up turning it all around. And it was the father-son relationship that was built over Mickey's life and all the support and coaching and sacrifice that was made leading up to that point. That created the influence for Mutt to have at that exact moment when he needed Mickey to snap out of it and listen to him. He was able to get his son's attention in that moment. And it took a lifetime of sacrifice to gain that influence at that exact time. So that's my favorite aspect of this whole story. And I've read about Mickey Mantle now for a week, and that's my favorite part so far. but it's just one tiny piece of the entire Mickey Mantle story. And I guess another cool component of this story is the father and son relationship that kept Mickey from giving up. That's something that people still talk about to this day, looking back from their own life. Rooting for Mickey Mantle with your dad, there's millions of people who have that memory. That's what I like about this story, and that's why we're still talking about Mickey Mantle 60, 70 years later. And so I can't wait to do another episode on Mickey Mantle. There's a lot more to talk about. I would strongly recommend you read his book, The Mick, published in 1985. It's a super easy read, and I couldn't put it down once I started reading it. So check out a few of my other episodes on a couple other old baseball legends. I did one on Babe Ruth in his early days as he tried to make a name for himself, which of course he did, going from George Ruth into the Babe, the biggest thing to ever hit the sports world. That was a fun episode. And I also did one on Ty Cobb. And after reading the book by Charles Learson titled Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty, after I read that book, I knew I had to do an episode on Cobb, an absolute legend. So I hope you check those out. And mostly, don't forget to make some time to kick your feet up and grab an old book about an old cultural icon like Mickey Mantle. And even with all their faults and all the crazy things they've done and all their mistakes, see if you can find out what made them so memorable. I'm always amazed by how much I think I understand something or someone. Then I read a great book and I come away with a completely new point of view. It happens over and over with me, so that's what I really love. So have a great rest of your day, and hopefully I've persuaded you now to learn more.